Hello.
Hello. Sorry for this inconvenience. Actually, there's some misunderstanding the timing.
Yeah, in fact, what your colleague had not realized is that the time difference has changed a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, that's true. We'll begin, sir. We'll begin soon. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Good evening, everyone. We have gathered here today for a very special session on something that we have been looking forward to since the beginning of this International Relations Scholastic Conclave. I'm extremely honored to introduce our esteemed speaker for this evening, Professor Christophe Jaffrelot, who will be speaking on populism, propaganda, and manufacturing consent. Professor Jaffrelot works at the Center for Studies in International Relations, Sciences Po, and has served as its director from 2000 to 2008. He is currently a research fellow at CNRS and a professor at Sciences Po. He is also a visiting professor at the India Institute, King's College, London, and has taught at Columbia University, Yale University, Johns Hopkins University, and as a global scholar at Princeton University. He has authored several books, including The Hindu Nationalist Movement and Indian Politics and Modi's India, Hindu Nationalism and the Rise of Ethnic Democracy. This session will be chaired by Professor Abdul Matin, one of the most seasoned academics and faculty member at the Department of International Relations, Jadavpur University. We will now commence the session. Over to you, Matin sir.
Thank you so much for your liberal introduction, Sasika. On behalf of the Department of International Relations, Jadavpur University, I welcome Professor Christophe Jaffrelot, and also I welcome all the audience who are present here. Extremely sorry for this inconvenience, and of course, the European time and the Indian time, and there has been recent change in the time. We are extremely sorry. I'm more than 450 participants registered for this program, and they will supposed to join at 7, but I'm sure that many of our technical departments will immediately mail them. Anyway, without further ado, as we all know, and Professor Jaffelo, I refer your writings for the UG3. There's a program called Democracy, Citizenship, and Nationalism, and I teach your paper, your writings, especially on the rise of ethnic democracy in India, using the theoretical framework of Professor Samir Smuha. Well, and first of all, just one sentence about Professor Jaffelo. Professor Jaffelo is basically an institution in himself. He has generations of scholars inspired by his work, especially on Hindutva, on society, politics, and political economy. And he's one of the famous important contributions is called the silent revolutions in India. And after that, and one more thing that I always say, that his PhD thesis is more than 1800 pages. I remember that one of the greatest scholars of our time. Without further ado, sir, on behalf of the Department of International Relations, the Scholarship Conclave Organizing Committee, I welcome you, and this is over to you, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I will immediately start because we need to save time as much as we can. So my presentation today will try to make sense of a paradox. The paradox is populism usually develops in the name of more democracy. Populists claim that elite groups have hijacked democracy and that people should get power again. And most of the time, gain momentum and win elections in the context of democracies. But once they take over power, they almost systematically weaken democracy and even sometimes destroy democracy. So this is the paradox I'd like to explain. And for that, I will first of all emphasize the affinities between populism and authoritarianism. Two isms that have been very well studied by a
Sir, could you please unmute yourself?
Oh, I don't know who had muted me. Okay. So these affinities between populism and authoritarianism will be the first part of my presentation. Well, the first reason why we see such affinities developing has much to do with the personalization of power that populism implies. The populist is a man who systematically relate directly to the people and short circuit intermediaries, parties or patrons, all kinds of intermediaries. And most of the time, he claims that he is the defender of the people in the name of its masculinity, strongman repertoire, is also the conduit for expressing the resentment and even the revenge of those on the bottom. So he can do that because of his plebeian background, but he doesn't need to be a plebeian. Donald Trump was not a plebeian, but he can at least um, show to the people that he shares their culture, their manners, their language, and this, of course, by opposition to the elite's propriety. And he very often transgresses the codes of good behavior. His discourse is sarcastic. His attacks are below the belt. That's one of the ways he relates to the others. Secondly, he very often also exploits the repertoire of victimization. He can most of the time appear as a victim of the establishment, the same way the people are also victims of the establishment. He can appear as a victim of the establishment because he doesn't speak the right language. He may not be even English speaking. He is not from the crucible of the elite groups. To take the example of Donald Trump again, it was very interesting to see that he could appear as different from those who were on the East and on the West Coast. So he was not from the plebeians, but he could appear as different from the establishment and could appear as a victim, especially a victim of the media who are representing this intelligentsia. Third, and even more importantly, if the populist is close to the people, claims to be like the people, from the people, he is also the one who has supernatural qualities. He has charisma, and this notion of charisma comes from Max Weber. Max Weber defines charismatic legitimacy, as the ones endowing the man who does exceptional things, good or bad, but he does things nobody else had done before. If you take examples in India, you will see that Indira Gandhi could be a populist leader with some charisma because she did things nobody had done before. She tested the first nuclear device. She broke Pakistan in 71. She also annexed Sikkim in 74, and she declared the emergency in 75 and could be re-elected in spite of this because of this in 1980. So you have a clear specificity, that is the legitimacy coming from charisma, coming from exceptional deeds. Similarly, you look at Narendra Modi, he has done things nobody else had done before. The 2002 pogrom, the Balakot strikes, the demonetization, good or bad. He has done things that showed that he could take the life of people in his hands, and that is exceptional. So when you have all these qualities that the populist leader uses, especially at the time of election campaigns when he is in the opposition, it helps to win elections, of course. And most of the time, when a populist leader wins elections, he wins elections, and his party, his candidates win elections because of him, because of his charisma, because of his legitimacy. So the personalization of politics that he represents, when he becomes the prime minister, the president, whatever, he concentrates inevitably power in his hands. And if it is a parliamentary system, all those who have been elected in parliament have been elected because of him. And the party does not exist anymore because he is the party himself. Most of the time, populist leaders don't like to have parties, don't need to have parties. Bolsonaro, for instance, had no party before he took over power. They relate, I repeat, directly to the people using social media rather than party cadres. So when the populist leader takes over power, he can appear as embodying the whole nation. He is the people. And that is conducive to authoritarianism. One, because there is hardly no space left for the opposition. The people can only be one. So if the leader is the people, what can the opposition represent? There is a great burst of unanimity behind him. And this is again something Narendra Modi kept repeating. India won. He used to say Gujarat won when he won elections in Gujarat. Now, when he wins election in India, India won, which means that there is no space for the losers. There is no space for the opposition. So you have a real authoritarian potential there because you delegitimize pluralism. A multi-party system is not compatible with a populist leadership. There is a denial of the legitimacy of political opponents, and therefore populists are against pluralism. Number one. Number two, they are also against dissent. Because if they are the people, they have the voice of the people. They are the voice of the people. Something Trump used to say repeatedly, I am your voice. Well, if I am the voice of the people, dissenters, again, are not legitimate. So NGOs, trade unions, any kind of non-political opponent lose their legitimacy. It's true, of course, also of intellectuals. Third, institutions. Well, institutions are very important in a democracy, especially those in charge of checks and balances. We have the judiciary, we have the election commission, we have, of course, parliament, so many institutions which are part of the democratic architecture. Well, the populist leader who has been elected and who claims that he is the people can tell well, what is the legitimacy of the judges of the Supreme Court if I represent the voice of the people? And in many countries, including Orban's Hungary, including Poland, the populists have downgraded the judiciary systems by saying, well, this is not a legitimate alternative or a center. The judiciary should follow what the people's voice says, and I am the people's voice. Huh? So the appointment of the judges has to be changed because the independence of the judiciary is not supposed to be that complete. This is incidentally what should have happened in India in 2014 when the first bill that the Modi government introduced was a reform of the way judges of the Supreme Court were to be appointed. Not only the judiciary, but also the bureaucracy is clearly a power center that the populists control by appointed friends, by appointed people who will never object to what their projects are. In the case of India, it's very easy to see how the CBI chief, how the election commission chief have been changed according to their proximity to the government. So there are obvious affinities between populism and authoritarianism. Now, in the second part of my presentation, I will go one step further by looking at varieties of populism and authoritarianism, because these are very large concepts. There are all kinds of populism, at least there are different kinds of populism, and there are also different kinds of authoritarianism. Populisms are mostly of two kinds. You have the populist of the left, like Juan Domingo Perón in Argentina, in Latin America, like Indira Gandhi, like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, like Mrs. Bandaranaike, many populists of the left have, in the 1970s especially, shown that you could win elections by claiming that you were doing everything for the people. As a leftist, of course, in practice, most of the time, they have not done much, if anything. And you have the populist of the right. And the populist of the right represent very different species of populists that we call national populists, because in their case, and this is a formula Gino Germani introduced in the 70s, in their case, the people they represent are defined by language, race, religions, by markers, identity markers that are ascriptive. So, in fact, they do not defend the people at large. They do not claim that they represent all the citizens. They defend the sons of the soil. Those who claim that they represent the legitimate citizens vis-à-vis the exogenous other, the migrants, the descendants of former conquerors, religious minorities, all those who are not part of the majority. You can replace national populism by majoritarianism. This is the same definition. This brand of populism, national populism, has affinities with a specific brand of authoritarianism. In fact, with two specific brands of authoritarianism. And in the first place, with uh, what Sami Smua calls ethnic democracy. You know, an ethnic democracy is a democracy where you have a relatively independent judiciary, a relatively uh, free press, where you have elections, but the majority of the sons of the soil have more rights than the other citizens. And of course, Israel is the archetype of this political system because the state of Israel, uh, combine an ethnic Jewish identity and a parliamentary system, drawing its inspiration from Western Europe. So, in Israel, the Jewish nature of the nation state uh, go together with restrictions imposed on the rights of minorities, primarily the Palestinians. Israel's titular name, calendar, days and sites of commemoration, heroes, flag, emblem, national anthem, names of places, ceremonies, all this is Jewish. And not only that, but access to some of the facilities of the state is also defined by religion. Um, even last week there was a controversy about what kind of meat can you eat in the canteens of the public schools in Israel because share was imposed upon everybody or could be imposed upon everybody. This is a symbolic example that shows that yes, this is an ethnic democracy where the majority imposes its identity upon the others. And of course, this is a contradiction in terms. Ethnic democracy is a contradiction in terms. It's a form of authoritarianism because it denies the rights, it denies some rights to the minorities. Well, national populism has affinities with another brand of authoritarianism, and that is electoral authoritarianism. And it's very interesting to see that all the populists who have won elections and who have become authoritarians have continued to hold elections. In that sense, they are not fascists, except Putin, probably, who started as a populist and became a kind of a totalitarian leader. All the others have continued to organize elections. So in fact, this month and next month, there'll be elections in the Philippines where Duterte may lose. There'll be elections in Hungary where Orban may lose. In September, there'll be elections in Brazil where Bolsonaro may lose. Erdogan lost some of the local elections. He wanted to win in Istanbul and elsewhere. So you have this constant electoral cycle. Why? Because I refer to my first part, you need to get the mandate of the people. You need to be elected by the people for telling the world, I am the people. I have this legitimacy. So you have elections, but these leaders try hard to do everything for not losing elections. So they will distort the electoral process. How? Well, first, as I've mentioned before, by appointing bureaucrats of their liking in charge of elections, at the helm of election commissions, for instance. Secondly, they will also force the media to fall in line in many different ways, including IT raids, ED raids, whatnot. And thirdly, there is the money question. They are able most of the time to amass huge amounts of funds for fighting elections in a completely asymmetrical manner. In fact, in 2019, BJP spent $3.6 billion for election campaign. That is more than all his opponents. And election bonds, of course, helped a lot. So there are elections, they are needed, but they are not free and fair elections. And it's not an even playing field anymore. That's an illusion, and a useful illusion, but still an illusion. So I will close here because I have only 15 minutes left, and I would like to have some time for the Q&A. But I hope I've made my points clear. I looked at things which were not focused on India only, but interesting in some comparative perspective. And if the constant noise we are hearing could be stopped, that would be a real relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jaffrelot. We are really sorry that somehow many people still in the queue. People are joining from all across the world. I mean, we have another 15 minutes, but I won't take much time. Professor, could you just enlighten us? You are, of course, you are using the concept of ethnic democracy in India, and if you could just have a brief, how you are relating this concept to the Indian context, so that will be helpful for us. And if there is any, there are a lot of questions, but it's better if you use our time more creatively, sir. If you could enlighten us a little bit on India.
This is easy. India is now a very clear example of ethnic democracy, simply because minorities, including Muslims and Christians, have become second-class citizens. And it's a de facto ethnic democracy. Israel is a de jure ethnic democracy. The constitution of the country defines it as a Jewish state. Well, the Indian constitution does not define India as a Hindu state. It's not de jure. Secularism is still there. On the paper, but it's a de facto ethnic democracy, because de facto minorities don't have the same rights as the majorities. There are so many instances of this. You want to rent a place in a mixed neighborhood, vigilante groups will make sure that you will not. You take some cow to your farm, and you are accused by vigilante groups of taking them to the slaughterhouse, and you may be lynched on the way. Love jihad, again, something that reflects the role of vigilante groups. To pray where for decades Muslims have prayed in Gurgaon, impossible these days, again because of vigilante groups. So the de facto dimension of this ethnic democracy relies on this role of vigilante groups, which are the other side of the same coin as the police. The police in BJP ruled states and the vigilante groups are the two sides of the same coin, and work together, making it, you can say, de jure as much as a de facto ethnic democracy sometimes, at least in places like Uttar Pradesh.
Thank you so much, sir. There is a question by Soumya Arora. The question is like, how does a populist leader successfully delegitimize dissent? For example, how were protests like CAA and the farmer protests dismissed by the government despite having huge number of people participating in them?
Well, usually the trick is this is anti-national. This is something that goes against the interest of the nation. Incidentally, this is something Indira Gandhi used also a lot, this idea of the anti-national, when during the emergency especially. So you delegitimize dissent by saying this. It's anti-national, it's against the security of the state. And the NCR and the CA were presented as necessary for the national security. National security is usually invoked for delegitimizing dissent. That's true for these two. It's also true for the Bhima Koregaon accused. The Bhima Koregaon accused have been delegitimized because of the letters which have been planted in the in the laptop of some of them. So you have, and that could be presented as against the law. So this is the usual trick, and then you have fear. It's not so easy to dissent. You need a lot of courage. So at the end of the day, why should I take any risk? Why should I protest? Why should I dissent if this is bound to make my life hell? Because of social media, because of so much pressure. Well, there are many ways, but that's a short list.
I could see Auditro has raised his hand. Auditro, you want to please go ahead? Unmute yourself and yeah. Okay, there's a question, sir, by Drishti Shah. Could you give your insight on the changing nature of electoral politics through the prism of populism?
Can you say it again?
Could you please explain, give insights on the changing nature of electoral politics through the prism of populism?
Yeah, these are the points I've made in my presentation. Elections are now more in the form of plebiscites. It's for giving legitimacy to the leader. And secondly, the competition is not free and fair anymore. There is such a huge imbalance, huge distortion because of the reasons I've mentioned. Money, media, and well, you can say muscle, but it's more than muscle. It's influence. It's also the institutions in charge of elections, which are not as impartial as they used to be.
So there's multiple questions. There are questions by Aniba Junaid. She's saying that, sir, I agree that there is a thin line between populism and authoritarianism today. Can it be said that today there is no possibility that populism will not turn to be anti-democratic? And also, where do you think the problem lies? The appeal to religion or with the issues pertaining to democracy?
Well, this is a very vast question. First of all, some people consider today that, well, to defeat populists of the right, we need to rely on populists of the left. This is what Laclau used to say, what Chantal Mouffe is saying, which means we will never be able to beat populists of the right by relying on political parties, by relying on trade unions. This is passé. This is now irrelevant. We have to use the same weapons as the populist of the right. That's not necessarily true. You can also argue that, and that's the second part of the question, um, religion, identity politics can be replaced by socioeconomic issues. And in fact, it's interesting. The populists feel the need to constantly refer to socioeconomic issues. It does not rely only on identity politics. For instance, in the case of India, you want to promote this idea of uh, welfare, welfareism with the Jan Dhan Yojana, the Ujjwal Yojana. The question is, how long will people take? How long will, for how long will they believe that the populist is indeed helping them socioeconomically? Because he is not. He is not. When you look at the global picture, the larger picture, you see that taxes, indirect taxes on petrol, on everything, have increased so much that there is no way these schemes can compensate what they are losing in terms of purchasing power. Same with NREGA. NREGA has lost a lot of its budget. So socioeconomic schemes are usually illusions during the populist time, full of emotion, full of symbolism, as if the prime minister himself was giving you a gas cylinder, and helping you personally. This is what you hear when you listen to Man Ki Baat. You know, Man Ki Baat is all about this. I'm going to give you something personally. That this something is much less than what Manmohan Singh was giving through the federal system, through the states, has not been realized so far. And this is a real mystery to me. What are the people thinking when they compare what was the social programs of yesterday and what are the social programs of today? Very interesting. Yeah, in your title, you had propaganda and the manufacturing of consent. Here we are. This is exactly the conclusion we draw from these enigmas.
Sir, if you allow, can we take few more questions, sir? Already inbox is flooded with questions. I know that you have to leave, but
yeah, I can take 10 more minutes. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. This is from Mimasha Pandit, and I'm sorry that I have to scroll a bit. Populist governments have garnered support through propaganda, no doubt. But my question is, doesn't that reduce popular support to a cultural sponge accepting everything blindly that is given to them? And if that is not the case, then why are the people responding positively to the propaganda?
Yeah, no, this is a very good point, because it's not as if democracy was perfect before. If populists are voting to power, it's also because of a lot of resentment. And clearly, in the case of India, after Mandal arose so many expectations. The fact that the economy in 2013, 2014 was not doing well at all, the fact that joblessness had become so problematic, and the fact that the leaders appeared as corrupt and appeared as cut off from the people, that of course explains the rise of BJP. It's not as if there was no good reasons for voting against the UPA government. The problem is, the moment populists are in office, to dislodge them from office becomes very difficult. And but I agree, it's not only because of fear, it's not only because of authoritarian measures, it's also because they are very good at manufacturing consent. And one of the things they've done, one election after the other, is to tap those who've been frustrated by the reservation policies. You know, the non-Jatav SCs, the non-Yadav OBCs, those who have not benefited from reservations, have been easily tapped by BJP. So in their case, it's not only because of Hindutva, it's not only because of, if you want, identity politics. It's also because they want something, they want to have a share of the spoils, which they think have been denied to them, not by elite groups, but by other OBCs or by other SCs. So this is the paradox of reservations. Instead of uniting SCs and OBCs, it has divided SCs and OBCs.
So there is an interesting question that how do you see the role of Congress in supporting Modi's populist image?
Well, I don't think they are supporting his populist image. They just don't know how to handle it. They just don't know how to fight against it. And one of the problems Congress has is it has the best ideas. In 2019, the program was by far the best program, one of the few programs, platform, election manifestos, where you add something on environment, where you add something interesting on how you fight mass poverty. But this is not audible. And it's not audible because when do you see Congress leaders on primetime TV these days? You know, that's very difficult. So this plus the leadership problem, it makes things very complicated. And last but not least, co-option. So many Congress MLAs, MPs from Madhya Pradesh, from Karnataka have been bought. How do you resist a Rolls Royce? Nobody knows how to resist a Rolls Royce, at least not in Bangalore.
So there's a question like, as you explained, the turn to ethnic democracy is more or less a global phenomena. Do you think that this order is here to stay? What are the ways available, you think, to counter it?
Well, I think it is with us for quite some time. It has become a new political system. We tended to think that it was a phase, that it would go. No, I think a new political system has crystallized and will be with us for a long time. It has much to do also with techniques of communication. Social media are changing politics, and populism is a product of social media to a large extent. How to fight against this? Well, by asking people to think a little bit more and to count a little bit more. What are the promises which have been really held? You know, what does the national populist deliver? It delivers symbolically. A temple in Ayodhya, new statues almost everywhere around the corner, a monk at the helm of the largest estate of India. Right. Symbolically, it helps the majority community to assert its identity on the country. But does it deliver in terms of job creation, redistribution, infrastructures, policies? You know, that was the great, and last but not least, rights. You know, UPA have right to information, right to education, right to food. All these rights have been undermined. Where is the right to information today? A ghost of itself. So, to ignore or neglect or abandon democracy for their country to be dominated by the symbols of their religion, if so, fine. They've got the right choice. But have they realized the implications? More inequalities, less development, more violence, less soft power. Well, for that, of course, you need to propaganda all the time, because you do not realize this if you are immersed in some propaganda all the time. And that's what the few intellectuals who have the courage try to do, to expose these contradictions.
So how can one locate the individual identity rights, since populism speaks of applying the differential disparate demands in a chain of equivalence according to Laclau's approach?
Well, that's a very philosophical question, but this is precisely the problem with the populist theoreticians, including Laclau. They tend to devalorize individual rights, claiming that, well, this is a kind of luxury good that the liberals have introduced. Individualism. Well, individualism may well be the antidote. My interest in my individual rights may well be the antidote, especially if caste is not. Because if caste is not because of the paradox of reservations I was mentioning, so if there is no way you can build an OBC front or a SC front, there is no collective antidote. And therefore, it may be my interest and my liberty in my rights, which may be the only antidote. But for that, you need to emancipate yourself from collective values, from family values. You have to be modern. You have to be fully modern.
So in recent trends of democracy, we see the various notion of populism reshaping the meaning of democracy. Would you think electoral integrity and institutions rebuilding is a process of democratic means, which not seen anywhere in the world today except in the Scandinavian countries? And I would like to club another questions with that. There's a recent book by Nalin Mehta where he questions your data about BJP. Would you like to respond to that as well?
Yes, well, the Nalin Mehta controversy is typical. We have found the same results. You may argue vis-a-vis few cases, but by and large, we have the same data. And in fact, the data were collected by the TCPD, Gilles Vernier's team in Ashoka University. Now, it draws from these data conclusions which are completely different from the ones we have found. He will say, look, many OBC jatis are now represented by BJP. And that's true, for the reason I've just mentioned. They have not co-opted Yadav or Jatavs, but a large myriad of smaller caste groups, precisely who the Jatavs and the Yadavs. So Kurmis, Raj bars, Lodis, Gujars, so on and so forth. But he draws from this the conclusion that BJP is more representative of the Indian society, which is completely wrong, because when you look at the percentage of upper caste MLAs and candidates, you see that BJP is much more elitist. It's still a Rajput Brahmin party. So it's not because you have more representation from a larger number of low caste groups that you are more democratic. What matters is, where are the old upper caste dominant groups, and they are still in office. And this is exactly what Hindutva is about. Hindutva is a reaction to Mandal. It's a way to respond to the rise of OBCs. And it has worked. Because in 2014, and in 2019 even more, we saw all of a sudden Banya Brahmins, Rajputs back in office, in parliament, in the governments. So this is really a very disturbing way to distort data. And we can speak about propaganda. I think this is intellectual propaganda. I forgot the previous question.
Sir, let's go to another question, sir.
Okay, the last one maybe, because I need to go
okay,
now.
yeah, last one. This is the last one. Question by Sanchari. What reforms should be made in caste-based reservation politics in India to ensure equality and strengthen democracy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. A very complicated but very good question. Well, if people were paying attention to real issues, this is what they would think about. How do you make sure that the son of a Dalit IS officer, or the son of Yadav IPS officer, does not benefit from reservations unreservedly at the expense of the son of a Katik, or the son of, I don't know, a Nain? Well, you have to invent a mechanism. And this mechanism needs to factor in socioeconomic dimensions. A creamy layer may be a possibility. And Dalit intellectuals should come forward with some suggestions on that front, instead of protecting their own interest, vested interest. At the same time, there is something else. The number of public jobs is shrinking so much that the whole mechanism, the whole system has to be revisited. Because you may get larger percentages of such a small number of jobs that you'll be fooled, you'll be cheated. So the question now is, how do we go beyond the public jobs, which are so few, to make positive discrimination really effective, or really helping the poor? That's one of the challenges. You know, these are some of the policies which should deserve all our attention, instead of fighting for love jihad or whatnot. Abdul, I suggest we do it again.
Sure. That's what I was about to say, sir. On behalf of the department, I would like to invite you again, maybe for another long session for our undergraduate and postgraduate students, because we are very much interested to engage with your conceptual categories. But just wait for 1 minute, sir. And this is, I would like to call Ms. Mehuli Sarkar, our undergraduate student of political science at Jadavpur University. She will propose formal vote of thanks. This is over to Mehuli.
Thank you so much, sir. Before I begin with the vote of thanks, I'd like to apologize profusely to everyone, especially our honorable speaker, Professor Jaffrelot, and our honorable chair, Professor Martin, for the technical inconvenience that was caused from our end. Thank you so much, Professor Jaffrelot, for your insightful session. I think as students of political science and international relations, not only did we enjoy, but we have learned thoroughly about such pertinent topics for today. Professor Martin, thank you so much for being a wonderful chair. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Professor Iman Pollan Lahiri, the head of the department at Jadavpur University International Relations, and our esteemed professors who have helped us in each and every step to curate this chapter of International Relations Holistic Conclave. And definitely, last but not least, our wonderful audience for sitting through and patiently being here with all of us. I would like to thank everyone once again and apologize on the behalf of the organizing committee. We hope you have a very good evening. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, sir. Bye-bye. আরেক বার সরি বলো সবাইকে
I'm very, very, very sorry on behalf of the department of behalf of the organizing committee that there was a technical inconvenience, and we've taken a note of everything that we should be correcting from the next time. If the student coordinators would like to say something.
I personally see more than 60 friends from all across India and beyond India who are in the queue and also waiting. I'm so sorry on the behalf of my department. Maybe we will organize soon, and I have already spoken to Professor Jaffrelot. He will give us a date and we will have another session.
Hello everyone, I'm really sorry on behalf of the organizing committee for this, the problem that we faced, and Professor Jaffrelot had to leave this session early. Many of us could not join the session. Many of your friends might have not been able to join the session. So it is my earnest request if you all could help your friends and who have already signed up for this session to lead them to the Facebook page of International Relations Scholastic Conclave, and the full session is there itself. They can watch it whenever they want to. We will also make sure that this session is being uploaded on YouTube, and all the links for the same will be notified to you in due time. Thank you everyone, and thank you for your presence.
Professor Martin, I'd again like to apologize to you.
No problem at all.
We're very sorry, sir.
I need to break my fast, and it's okay, no issues.
Good evening, sir. And to the entire audience, I would really like to personally apologize because the mistake was a huge mistake from our end. There was approximately 467 registrants, and unfortunately, only half of you could attend it. We will make sure that the meeting link for the same, the recording of the entire meeting is uploaded and shared with all of you. And I would personally take the responsibility on behalf of the entire OC to arrange another insightful session with Professor Jaffrelot so that everyone of you can attend in due time. Extremely sorry from our end. I'm extremely sorry.
Hello, sir. Should we end the meeting then?
Yeah. People from Bangladesh is joining. I have to tell them personally. Anyway, end this meeting, otherwise they'll kill me. Okay. Chalo. Thank you.
We will be sending the recording link.
Yeah. Please make sure that all this registered participant gets the link.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Definitely.
please do that. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you everyone
Bye-bye.
for joining.